Hi, David Taup here, nextlevelguitar.com, and we've been getting inundated with emails lately with questions about amp choices. So I thought I would talk about how to choose an amplifier and how to make your decision a little easier. Now, here's what happens. A lot of times we get emails, and Tim and I, we try to answer all the emails that we get, hundreds of emails every week, because we like getting back to the good people. Don't we, Tim?
We love it.
Yes, indeed. I'll get a question like this. It'll say, hey, David and Tim, what's up? I'm in the market for a new amplifier. What can you recommend? Right? And that's
need a little more data.
Exactly. That's exactly the email we get. And we get that email constantly, right? And I usually email back, hey, thanks for writing us, checking out our videos. I need a little bit more information to make a recommendation for you. Please answer these questions. And then they email me back and we go. So what you want to do when you're trying to decide on an amplifier is you have to funnel your choices down, because there's so much stuff on the market and it could get totally overwhelming. So you really have to funnel it down. And here's how you do that. The first question you have to ask yourself is what's the application? Do I need an amplifier for practicing in my bedroom? Do I need an amplifier for jamming with my friends? Do I need an amplifier for playing with a live band in small clubs? Do I need an amplifier that playing in large clubs? Application will point you to the right direction. There's no sense buying a Marshall half stack if you're going to be just using it to practice in your bedroom. Okay, that's a waste. So application will steer you into the right direction. The second thing is budget. Okay, so remember, we're funneling our choices down. There's no sense looking and trying out, unless you just want to go and have some fun. No sense playing through a $1,500 amp if you have a $300 budget, okay? That has impulse purchase written all over it. And I'm not saying don't go to Guitar Center or whatever big music store and try out stuff. That's a lot of fun. But if you're seriously looking for an amp, you have to have a budget in mind, and the budget will sometimes tell you, okay, what amp or amp family you're going to go to. The third thing is, do you like solid state or tube amplifiers, okay? Two totally different sounds. Generally, I prefer tube amps. In my live amps, I use all tube amps. But the thing is about tube amps, there's positives and there's negatives compared to solid state. A lot of it depends on what sound you like best. So really let your ears guide you and find out what sounds best to your ears. I like the warmth of tube amps, but the downside to tube amps, I think they sound better than solid state amps generally. But the downside is they're more expensive. You have to maintain them, and for most of them set the biasing and replace tubes. And you have to really crank them up to get that the tubes breaking up and getting them to sound really good. You can't have a Marshall half stack or a big Fender DeVille amp on 0.5. It's not going to sound that good. You have to...
You're on 11.
Exactly. Like Nigel, you got to crank it up, because with tube amps, you have to get those tubes hot, heated up. You have to get the voltages up there so the tubes can talk back and forth, and you really have to get the amp to run hot, okay, to get it to sound really, really exceptional on the tube amps. Obviously, if you're just playing in your bedroom, you know, and you don't want to wake the neighbors, your tube amp isn't going to sound all that great. So if you just blew $1,000 on a tube amp just for playing in your bedroom, you're never going to get your money's worth out of that amp, because you got to really crank it. And they run hot. One amp I use live a lot, I use a Matchless Independence 3-channel amp, and it is hot. It runs really hot. And in fact, in the owner's manual of the amp, it even says don't put a fan behind it or try to cool it off. It's designed to... Tube amps are designed to get hot. So that's some of the cons. The big pro, I think, to tube amps is I think they sound better. I use solid state amps too, especially when I'm doing video work and DVD work, because in the studio I can't really crank them up. So I really can't get my ultimate tone here on these videos, because if I play it that loud, the camera mic's going to clip, or you won't be able to hear me over the amp. You won't be able to hear the vocals. So decide what you like best, tube amp or solid state. And a lot of times if your budget is lower, you know, $200, $300, you're not going to afford. Tube amps are generally more expensive too. And then the next thing is you want to start narrowing it down by features. When you're buying an amplifier, a lot of times what starts tacking onto the price is what features come with the amp. For instance, some amps come with built-in reverb. okay? And that costs more money. I happen to like a lot of the built-in reverbs, like on the Fender amps, the nice tank reverb, or if it's a nice warm tube reverb. So a lot of the reverbs that are built into the amps sound really, really nice, especially if it's a nice big tank or a tube reverb. So it's nice having that feature. Now some amps come with that built-in reverb, some don't. The ones that do will cost a little more. If you want an amp with a built-in effects loop, again, that's another feature that costs money. That's a really nice feature to have, especially if you use a lot of pedals effects, because then you could run those pedals through the effects loop instead of, if you don't have the effects loop, then you have to run your guitar into the pedals and then your pedals into the amp. And what that's going to do, it's going to rob your tone, because the pedals then are now your guitar tone is being affected because the pedals are going through the EQ section and the preamp section, whereas if you have them separately,
you're chopping out the middleman.
Right, exactly. That's a good way to put it. Through the effects loop, all that is separate, and you're getting more of a truer tone. So having that effects loop is a real nice feature if you use a lot of effects. Obviously, if you don't use a lot of effects, you don't like reverb, don't buy an amp that has all those, because you're paying more for that, okay? Some of the other features are, you might want, depending on your situation, you might want an amp with built-in distortion, right? Or gain, and a lot of the amps have that. Channel switching, which is really important if you're playing in a band or if you're playing live a lot, meaning there's a channel for clean, and then a lot of times it'll come with a foot switch or a switch on the amp, which you hit, and it'll change the channel to a separate channel, and it might be a distorted channel, okay, or a rhythm channel. Some amps are 2-channel amps where they have 2 separate channels, and then some have 3 channels where you might have a clean, a rhythm, and then a lead. Some have 4 channels, okay? And again, every time you're adding a channel, guess what? The cost is going to go up. Especially some amps have separate channels, but it has the same EQ for each channel, meaning it'll have on the amp, you know, bass, mid, and treble. And you might have all 3 of those for every channel. Okay, if you want a separate EQ or a separate bass, mid, and treble knob for each channel, then again your cost is going to go up. But that's very preferable, because then you could really custom tailor each individual sound, your distorted tone, your clean tone. And I like multiple channel amps. I like amps with at least 3 or 4 channels, because when in the bands I play in, I'm always going from clean to dirty to rhythm. And then I like being able to add an effect pedal, a distortion on top of that. And then so it really opens up a lot of options. But again, you're talking about a lot of extra money. But multiple channels, if you need that or something you want to look for, which are outstanding. I love multiple channel amps. And then obviously you'd want that to come with a foot switch. So when you're playing live, you just click a switch. You're not going to be able to go over to your amp and click it. You know, you want to just step on it to change the channel. Sometimes even an amp will come with a foot switch where you could step on to change the channels, step on to turn the reverb on and off. Some amps have assignable effects loops, where you would step on an effects loop. You can assign a loop to a certain channel, which is very, very cool. But again, you get now a little bit more high tech. Again, if you're not going to be using multiple channels, there's no sense buying an amp with all these channels in it if you're not going to use them, because again, you're wasting your money. So again, let your application tell you which way you want to go. And when you go to check out amplifiers in the stores, bring your guitar, okay? Don't, you know, you want to hear how it sounds through your guitar, and try all the features on the amp and all your pickup combinations and really give it the road test. Again, they've made so many changes and the technology's gotten so good. Try them all. Try them all and see what sounds best to your ears. It's like a guitar. You know, what feels best in your hands? What sounds best to your ears? I could tell you what I like. I like Fender Stratocasters and Gibson Les Pauls and Paul Reed Smiths, but you know, you might not like those guitars. You might like Ibanez. You might like, you know, something else. And that's all good, you know. It's all a matter of what you like. So with amps, again, it's very, you know, personal. You have to find out what amp character, what tone do you like, you know. A Fender sounds very different, has very different tonal characteristic than a Mesa Boogie, which sounds very different than a Bad Cat, which sounds different than, you know, a Crate, which will sound different than a Marshall, okay? So all these amps have their own kind of mood to them, and you want to play them all and see what you like. And just because your favorite guitar player uses a certain amp doesn't necessarily mean that's the amp for you, because it'll sound different with you playing through it. than it will them. Okay.